Sanat Kumar, heading the four Kumāras, is um, responding to Mahārāja Pṛthu's amazing questions. The first question was about how to increase the good fortune in the life of those who are totally entangled in material life, especially the Grihasthas. And the second question is how to accelerate one's progress in spiritual life, how to make rapid advancement. And Sanat Kumar, as we saw in text number 22, gave a very pointed answer to these questions, and he listed down 5 activities of devotional service in that particular verse. Now, Sanat Kumar is elaborating on that answer by focusing on the qualitative aspect, like what are the internal dispositions of the heart. So the focus for 22nd verse was on centering our life around hearing about Krishna, because everything springs from there. What we hear and how we hear become the basis for everything else. So that prescription is not just situated in the vacuum, but that is also dependent on how we are actually governing our life. What kind of qualities can assist the practitioner in maturing the reception of Krishna Katha. So Sanat Kumar highlights on some qualities like non-violence, tolerance, first of all. And then he re-emphasizes on the hearing process, and then talks about what's going to happen is that our material conceptions of life, which are decorating our heart, usually will get overwritten by the spiritual conceptions. And when that happens, what would be the experience looks like? That the transformation of the desires. He gives 2 beautiful analogies to help us understand the process. Okay, so the first of all, Sanat Kumar says that anyone who is wishing to advance spiritually must be non-violent. They must follow the footsteps of the great acharyas, and they should do so while remembering the nectar of the Supreme Lord's pastimes. And they should follow the regulative principles. And while doing so, while following the regulative principles, they should not blaspheme others. Therefore, a devotee should lead a very simple life. Now, a very simple life, it is about cultivating a simple heart. So a devotee should lead a very simple life and should not be disturbed by the duality of opposing elements. He should learn to tolerate them. So 24th purport, Prabhupada is emphasizing on these core spiritual qualities that we should all aspire for. A devotee should be tolerant and should be very much compassionate toward others. For example, if he suffers personal injury, he should tolerate it. But if someone else suffers injury, the devotee need not tolerate it. The word smritya is very important in spiritual life. Smritya means remembering Krishna always. Life should be molded in such a way that one cannot remain alone without thinking of Krishna. We should live in Krishna so that while eating, sleeping, walking, and working, we remain only in Krishna. Only Krishna Consciousness Society recommends that we arrange our living so that we can remember Krishna. Another feature of the devotee is nirihaya, which means simple living. Niriha means gentle, meek, or simple. A devotee should not live very gorgeously and imitate a materialistic person. Plain living and high thinking are recommended for a devotee. He should accept only so much as he needs to keep the material body fit for the execution of devotional service. So, question is, how can one be fixed in these practices? And the answer to that is the verse number 25, where the expression is so beautiful. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constant hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is how you live in Krishna. So the living in Krishna essentially is dependent on the quality of our hearing. So Prabhupada in 25th purport is writing, this verse is especially mentioned to substantiate the devotional process of hearing the subject matter. A devotee does not like to hear anything other than subjects dealing with spiritual activities or the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We can increase our propensity for devotional service by hearing Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam from realized souls. And this line is very nice. The more we hear from realized souls, the more we make advancement in our devotional life. The more we advance in devotional life, the more we become detached from the material world. The more we become detached from the material world, as advised by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the more we increase in attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, a devotee who actually wants to make progress in devotional service and go back home, back to Godhead, must lose interest in sense enjoyment and associating with persons who are after money and sense gratification. So what does one gain when one becomes fixed on this path? And that answer is there in verse number 26. Upon becoming fixed in his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the grace of the spiritual master and by awakening knowledge and detachment, the living entity situated within the heart of the body and covered by the 5 elements burns up his material surroundings exactly as fire arising from wood burns the wood itself. This is the analogy number 1. Okay. So one may say that one needs a particular material situation in order to live in this world, even to execute Krishna consciousness. Like, for example, we need this body, because without the body, how can we even hear and chant? But the key point is that the hearing and chanting, it stimulates devotion, which causes the necessary detachment from the body, which is the very facility that is allowing them to serve. And therefore, an advanced devotee, while living in this body, remains simultaneously aloof from it. And this point is explained in verse number 26 purport. An advanced devotee, therefore, does not live within the material body, but within his spiritual body, just as a dry coconut lives detached from the coconut husk. even though within the husk. The pure devotee's body is therefore called Chinmaya Sharir, or spiritualized body. In other words, the devotee's body is not connected with material activities. And as such, a devotee is always liberated. Brahma Bhuvaya Kalpate. Srila Rupa Goswami also confirms this. Iha yasya harer dasya karmana manasa kira nikhilashu api avastasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. Whatever his condition may be, one who is engaged fully with his body, mind, and speech in the service of the Lord is liberated, even within this body. Therefore, this position is now furthermore described by Sanat Kumar, this position of liberation from all material desires. So that's in 27th verse. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, right? This is while we are living in this body. You can just see the continuation of the flow of thoughts here. So when a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated in all material qualities, liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. In other words, there is complete harmony between externals and internal. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dreamer and the dream. So this may appear to be an impersonal idea, right? The distinction between the soul and the super soul is annihilated. And therefore, it is important that we understand what does this mean. So Prabhupada therefore clarifies in purport number 27 that this is the stage of oneness or merging into the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What does that mean? This means that the individual soul, while keeping his individuality, no longer has separate interests. No longer has separate interests. That is how the distinction between the external and the internal, or the distinction between the soul and the super soul, is vanquished, because the soul is in complete harmony with the interest of the super soul. He is fully in the service of the Lord and he has nothing to do for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, he sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not himself. His personal interest completely perishes. When a person comes out of a dream, the dream vanishes. While dreaming, a person may consider himself a king and see the royal paraphernalia, his soldiers, etc. But when the dream is over, he does not see anything beyond himself. Similarly, a liberated person understands that he is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, acting in accordance with the desire of the Supreme Lord. And as such, there is no distinction between himself and the Supreme Lord, although both of them retain their individuality. Such a beautiful explanation of the 27th verse. Now, Sanat Kumar at this point is going to contrast the consciousness of a conditioned soul and the consciousness of a liberated or a pure soul. So that's 28th verse. So he's saying when the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires. And for that reason, he becomes subjected to designations. So what? So desires create designations. That's what is pointed out. But when one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And therefore, he doesn't need these artificial masks or designations that we carry while living in this material world. And therefore, Sanat Kumar presents an example to help us understand this. That we may see a man's reflection on water, on oil, or on mirror. So although the reflected image in each of these, whether it is water, oil, or mirror, may appear different due to the quality of the reflecting substance. but there is only one person. So similarly, those who are free from illusion, they see their individual soul acting, even though the soul's activities may be expressed through varieties of material bodies. So what actually prohibits one to have this kind of vision? So Sanat Kumar is explaining that the absorption of the mind and senses, which are seeking pleasure, um, agitates the mind and draws it from its natural spiritual consciousness. And this is the beautiful analogy that Sanat Kumar is giving. I've never heard this analogy before. That once real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Just as the water in a lake is gradually consumed by the various straws on its shore, so the consciousness of one who is absorbed in sense gratification is similarly consumed. So Prabhupada is explaining in the 30th verse this analogy, that if a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. Similarly, when the big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used up by them and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world. And thus, we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires towards the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. And therefore, if one wants to return to the spiritual world, one has to turn his desires from sense gratification toward the Supreme Lord's transcendental loving service. Because this desire is a natural aspect of consciousness. One cannot ever truly eliminate it, but it is possible to transform this self-centered material desires into spiritual desires to please the Supreme Lord. So what happens when the soul loses its natural consciousness of loving Krishna? So Sanat Kumar is explaining that in the verse number 31, that when one deviates from his original consciousness, which is Krishna consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. In other words, soul is no longer able to exhibit its true potential anymore, and therefore the soul is lost. And you can correlate this with the Bhagavad Gita 2nd chapter, where the fall down is described, which is also related to losing remembrance. Smriti Brahmshat Buddhi Nasho, right? So when the soul is lost in this way, it gravitates towards animalistic consciousness. And therefore, the actual consciousness is completely lost, and all actions that are performed in this material world, they're coming from the deepest degrees of forgetfulness and ignorance. So this section, I spent some time because the way Sanat Kumar is presenting is just amazing. And we will hear tomorrow the concluding instructions to Pṛthu Mahārāja, requesting him to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So thank you very much.